Sometimes a single moment of compassion can completely transform two lives forever. What started as Elena rushing to work on an ordinary Tuesday morning would lead to losing her job, facing financial ruin, and ultimately discovering that the stranger she saved would become the love of her life and change her destiny in ways she never imagined. But none of this seemed possible when she first saw him lying motionless on the sidewalk. Elena Martinez had always been the type of person who couldn't walk past someone in need. At 26, she worked as a marketing coordinator at Peterson & Associates, a mid-sized consulting firm downtown. Her salary barely covered her studio apartment rent and student loan payments, but she managed to scrape by each month with careful budgeting and the occasional ramen dinner. That Tuesday started like any other. Elena's alarm failed to go off, leaving her rushing through her morning routine. She grabbed a granola bar, threw on her navy blazer, and hurried toward the subway station. The October air was crisp, and fallen leaves crunched under her worn heels as she quickened her pace. She was already running 15 minutes late, and Mr. Peterson had made it clear that punctuality was non-negotiable. As she rounded the corner onto 5th Street, Eleanor nearly tripped over something in her path. Looking down, she gasped. A man in an expensive grey suit was lying unconscious on the sidewalk, his briefcase scattered beside him, papers fluttering in the morning breeze. Sir, can you hear me?" Elena knelt beside him, her heart racing. The man appeared to be in his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a face that looked peaceful despite his condition. His skin was pale, almost grey, and his breathing was shallow. Other pedestrians walked past, some glancing briefly before hurrying on their way. Elena felt for a pulse at his wrist. It was there but weak and irregular. She immediately pulled out her phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I found an unconscious man on 5th Street near the downtown library. He's breathing, but his pulse is weak. I think he might be having a heart attack. We're dispatching an ambulance now. Stay with him and don't move him unless he's in immediate danger. Elena looked at her watch. 8:47 a.m. She was supposed to be presenting the Morrison account proposal to Mr. Peterson in 13 minutes. Her phone buzzed with a text from her colleague, Lisa. "Where are you? Peterson is asking." She typed back quickly, "Emergency. We'll explain later." The man's eyelids fluttered, and he made a small groaning sound. Elena leaned closer. "Sir, help is coming. Just stay still, okay? You're going to be fine." She noticed his wedding ring and wondered if his wife knew where he was. His wallet had fallen from his jacket pocket, and Eleanor could see the corner of what looked like a driver's license, but she didn't want to invade his privacy. The ambulance arrived 8 minutes later, sirens wailing. 2 paramedics jumped out and immediately began assessing the man's condition. "Good call," one of them said to Elena as they checked his vital signs. "Looks like a cardiac event. How long has he been unconscious?" "I'm not sure. I found him like this about 10 minutes ago." As they loaded him onto a stretcher, the man's eyes opened briefly. He looked directly at Elena, his gaze unfocused but somehow grateful. Then his eyes closed again. "Which hospital are you taking him to?" Elena asked. "General Medical Center," the paramedic replied. "Are you family?" "No, I just found him. But I'd like to know how he's doing if that's possible." The paramedic nodded. "You can call the hospital later. You probably saved his life by calling when you did." Elena watched the ambulance disappear into traffic, then looked at her phone. 9:15 a.m. The presentation had started without her. Her stomach churned as she realized what this meant. She gathered the scattered papers from the man's briefcase, placed them neatly inside, and closed it. Someone at the hospital might need these to identify him. Then she hailed a taxi to follow the ambulance to General Medical Center. At the hospital, Elena waited in the emergency room for 2 hours before a doctor could tell her anything. The man had indeed suffered a massive heart attack and was currently in surgery. The prognosis was uncertain. "I have his briefcase," Elena told the nurse. "I thought someone might need it for identification." The nurse looked through it and found his business cards. "David Chen, senior partner at Chen & Associates Financial Consulting. We'll contact his emergency contacts." Elena's phone had been buzzing constantly. 17 missed calls from work, 12 text messages. She finally answered when Lisa called again. "Elena, where are you? Peterson is furious. He said if you're not here in the next hour, don't bother coming back. I'm at the hospital. I found someone having a heart attack and... Elena, you need to get here now. He's talking about firing you." Eleanor looked around the sterile waiting room, then at the surgery board where David Chen's name was listed as in progress. She had a choice to make: rush back to work and hope to salvage her job, or stay and make sure this stranger was going to be okay. "Tell Peterson I'll be there as soon as I can," she said, but even as she said it, she knew she wasn't leaving. Something about the way David had looked at her in those brief seconds before losing consciousness again made her feel responsible for seeing this through. By the time she finally made it back to the office at 2:30 p.m., her desk had been cleared out. Security escorted her to Peterson's office, where he was waiting with a termination letter already prepared. "Your employment is terminated immediately," Peterson said, without looking up from his papers. "We cannot tolerate this level of irresponsibility." Elena tried to explain, but Peterson wasn't interested in listening. Within 20 minutes, she was standing on the sidewalk outside her former workplace, holding a cardboard box containing her few personal items, officially unemployed. That evening, she called the hospital to check on David Chen. He had survived the surgery, but was in a medically induced coma. The doctors weren't sure when or if he would wake up. The next morning, Eleanor woke up to the harsh reality of unemployment. Her savings account showed $847.32, enough to cover rent for exactly half a month. She spent the morning updating her resume and scouring job websites, but every posting seemed to require experience she didn't have or connections she lacked. By noon, she found herself walking toward General Medical Center. She told herself she was just checking on David's condition, but deep down, she knew it was more than that. The memory of his grateful look haunted her, and she felt an inexplicable connection to this stranger whose life had intersected with hers so dramatically. The ICU nurse, a kind woman named Margaret, recognized her from the day before. "He's still in the coma, honey. The doctors say it could be days or weeks before he wakes up, if he does at all. Are you sure you're not family?" Eleanor shook her head. "I just want to make sure he's okay." Margaret studied her face and seemed to understand something that Elena herself hadn't yet realized. "Room 304. You can sit with him for a while if you'd like. Sometimes it helps to have someone there." David looked smaller in the hospital bed, connected to various machines that beeped and hummed softly. His face had more color than it had on the sidewalk, but he appeared fragile, vulnerable. Eleanor pulled a chair beside his bed and sat down. "I don't know if you can hear me," she began quietly, "but the doctors say you're going to be okay. You had a heart attack, but you made it through surgery." She paused, feeling foolish for talking to an unconscious person. "I lost my job because of helping you. I mean, not because of you specifically, but because I stayed at the hospital instead of going to work." She laughed bitterly. "My boss didn't care that someone's life was at stake. I guess that's just how the world works, right?" Over the following days, Elena's routine became predictable and desperate. Mornings were spent job hunting, filling out applications, making phone calls, attending interviews that led nowhere. Afternoons found her in room 304, talking to David about her struggles, her fears, and sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. "I had 3 interviews this week," she told him on Friday, 5 days after the incident. "One place said I was overqualified, another said I lacked experience, and the third just never called back. My rent is due in 2 weeks, and I have no idea how I'm going to pay it." The machines continued their steady rhythm. David's chest rose and fell mechanically with the ventilator, but there was no sign of consciousness. Elena found herself sharing things she had never told anyone. About her father leaving when she was 12, about working 2 jobs through college, about the loneliness of living in a big city with no real friends or family nearby. "You know what's funny?" she said during her second week of visits. "I've lived here for 4 years, and I've never had a conversation this honest with anyone. Maybe it's because I know you can't judge me or give me advice I don't want to hear." Margaret often checked on them, bringing Eleanor coffee or small snacks. "You're good for him," she said one afternoon. "His vital signs are more stable when you're here. I've seen it before. Some patients respond to familiar voices, even in comas. But he doesn't know my voice, Elena protested. Maybe not consciously, but something in his brain remembers you helping him. Don't underestimate the power of human connection. By the third week, Eleanor's financial situation had become critical. She had pawned her grandmother's jewelry, sold her laptop, and was surviving on dollar menu items and generic cereal. Her landlord had already called twice about the overdue rent. I might have to move back home, she told David during one particularly difficult visit. My mum lives in a tiny town about 300 miles from here. She works at the local diner and lives in a trailer park, but at least I'd have a roof over my head. Her voice cracked slightly. I never wanted to go back there. I came to the city to build something better, you know? But maybe I was just kidding myself. She wiped away a tear that had escaped. I keep thinking about that morning when I found you. If I had just walked past like everyone else, I'd still have my job. But I can't bring myself to regret helping you. Even though it ruined my life, I'd do it again. That evening, Elena received a rejection email from what had seemed like her most promising job prospect. The company had decided to go with an internal candidate. She stared at her phone screen in her dim studio apartment, feeling completely defeated. Her mother called while she was heating up her last can of soup. "Elena, honey, you sound terrible. What's going on?" Eleanor broke down and told her everything. The job loss, the financial struggles, the daily hospital visits to see a stranger in a coma. "Baby, you need to come home," her mother said gently. "I know it's not what you wanted, but you can't live on nothing. There's a waitressing job open at the diner. It's not much, but it's something." Eleanor looked around her tiny apartment, at the acceptance letters from college pinned to her corkboard, at the business book she'd bought with such optimism, at the city lights twinkling beyond her window. Coming here had represented hope, possibility, a chance at something bigger than her small-town roots. "Can you give me another week?" Eleanor asked. "Of course, sweetheart, but don't wait too long. Pride won't pay your bills." The next day, Eleanor sat beside David's bed and made a decision. "I have to leave soon," she told him. "I can't afford to stay here any longer. I keep hoping something will work out, but I'm out of options." She reached over and gently touched his hand. "I wanted to say goodbye properly and to thank you. These weeks of talking to you have been the most honest conversations I've had in years. I hope you wake up soon and get to go home to your family." She stood to leave, then paused at the door. "I hope your life is everything you want it to be when you wake up." As she walked down the hospital corridor, Eleanor didn't notice the slight flutter of David's eyelids or the almost imperceptible squeeze of his fingers against the bed sheets. Eleanor spent her final week in the city tying up loose ends. She gave her landlord notice, arranged for a moving truck, and said goodbye to the few acquaintances she had made. The hardest part was making her last visit to David. She had grown attached to their daily conversations, even though they were entirely one-sided. In room 304, she could be completely honest about her fears, her disappointments, and her dreams without fear of judgment or unwanted advice. David had become her confessional, her therapist, and somehow her friend. "This is it," she told him on Thursday afternoon, exactly 3 weeks after finding him on the sidewalk. "I'm leaving tomorrow morning. My mom wired me money for gas, and I packed everything I own into 12 boxes. She laughed sadly. 4 years of my life, and it all fits in the back of a pickup truck. Margaret had given her David's latest medical update. His brain activity was improving, and the doctors were cautiously optimistic about his recovery, but there was no timeline for when he might wake up. "The doctors think you'll be okay," Elena continued. "Your heart is healing, and your brain scans show good activity. You're going to wake up soon, I can feel it. And when you do, you'll go back to your life, your family, your business. You probably won't even remember this time, which is probably for the best." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small notebook. "I wrote down everything I told you just in case. I know it's silly, but talking to you helped me figure out what I really want from life. Maybe someday, if you remember any of this, you'll understand how much these conversations meant to me." Elena placed the notebook on his bedside table and stood up. "Thank you for listening, David. I hope you have a wonderful life." She leaned down and gently kissed his forehead. then walked toward the door without looking back. If she had turned around, she would have seen his eyes flutter open for just a moment before closing again. The next morning came too quickly. Elena loaded her meager possessions into the rented truck and took one last look at her studio apartment. The walls were bare, the space empty, but somehow it felt more like home than it ever had when she lived there. Maybe it was because she was finally being honest about who she was and what she wanted. As she drove through the city streets for the last time, Eleanor made a detour past the spot where she had found David. The sidewalk looked ordinary now, just concrete and fallen leaves. No sign of the life-changing moment that had occurred there 3 weeks ago. She was about to turn onto the highway when her phone rang. The caller ID showed General Medical Center. "Hello, is this Elena Martinez?" It was Margaret's voice. "Yes, what's wrong? Is David okay?" "He's awake, honey. He woke up about an hour ago and he's asking for you." Elena's heart stopped. "He's asking for me? But how does he know my name?" "That's what we'd like to know. He's been very agitated asking for the woman who saved him. He described you perfectly. Your dark hair, your height, even what you were wearing that first day. The doctors want to talk to you." Elena pulled over to the side of the road, her hands shaking. "I'm actually leaving town right now. I'm already packed and—" "Elena, I think you should come back. He says he remembers everything." 20 minutes later, Elena was standing outside room 304, her heart pounding. Through the window, she could see David sitting up in bed, looking alert and focused. A doctor was speaking with him, and David kept glancing toward the door as if he was waiting for someone. Margaret appeared beside her. "He's been asking about you since the moment he opened his eyes. The doctors are amazed. Most coma patients have significant memory gaps, but he seems to remember everything that happened while he was unconscious." "That's impossible," Elena whispered. "Medical science would agree with you, but David Chen is defying the odds in a lot of ways." The doctor stepped out of the room and approached Elena. "Miss Martinez, I'm Dr. Williams. Mr. Chen has been asking to speak with you. He says you've been visiting him daily and that he heard every word you said." Elena felt dizzy. "He heard me. It's extremely rare, but not unheard of. Some coma patients retain auditory processing even when they can't respond. He's been telling me about your conversations, your job search, your financial struggles, your decision to move back home. He's quite concerned about you." Elena stared through the window at David, who had now noticed her standing there. Their eyes met, and he smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him. He raised his hand in a small wave. "He wants to talk to you," Dr. Williams continued, "but I should warn you, he's been asking a lot of questions about your situation. He seems to feel responsible for what happened to your job." Elena took a deep breath and entered the room. David's eyes followed her as she approached his bed, and she could see intelligence and awareness there that had been absent for 3 weeks. "For you came back," he said, his voice hoarse but clear. "I got a call from the hospital. They said you were awake. I heard you say goodbye yesterday. I tried so hard to respond, to let you know I was listening, but I couldn't move or speak." David's eyes filled with tears. "Elena, I heard everything. Every word you said to me over these past 3 weeks." Elena felt her knees go weak. She sank into the familiar chair beside his bed. "That's impossible. You were in a coma." "I know how it sounds, but I was aware of everything. Your voice, your presence, your stories about your life. I heard about your job interviews, your financial struggles, your decision to move back home." He paused, studying her face. "I also heard about your kindness, your strength, and your incredible heart." Eleanor didn't know what to say. The man she had been speaking to as if he were unconscious had been listening the entire time. "There's something else," David continued. "Something I need to tell you. Something that's going to change everything." Eleanor looked at him, seeing something in his expression that made her heart race. Not fear, but anticipation. "What is it?" David took a deep breath. "I'm not just David Chen from Chen & Associates Financial Consulting. That's my side business." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. "My full name is David Chen Peterson. I own Peterson & Associates, the company you worked for. I'm the man who's been signing your paychecks for the past 2 years." Elena stared at David in complete shock. her mind struggling to process what he had just revealed. The machines around them continued their steady beeping, but everything else seemed to have stopped. "You're lying," she whispered. "Peterson is my boss. He's the one who fired me." David's expression was pained but determined. "Thomas Peterson is my general manager. I hired him 5 years ago to run the day-to-day operations while I focused on my consulting business. I own both companies, Elena. Every decision he makes ultimately comes from me." Elena stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "No, this is impossible. You're David Chen. Your business card said Chen and Associates." "Chen and Associates is my financial consulting firm. Peterson and Associates is my marketing company. I kept my maiden name professionally after my parents passed away." David tried to sit up straighter, despite his obvious weakness. "Elena, I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to listen to me." "I can't." Elena backed toward the door. "This is too much. You're telling me that the man I saved, the man I've been talking to for 3 weeks, is actually my boss? The boss who allowed me to be fired for helping someone?" "I didn't know," David said urgently. "I had no idea Peterson had fired anyone. I've been unconscious for 3 weeks, remember? But now that I do know, I'm going to fix this." Elena shook her head. "Fix this? You can't just fix 3 weeks of unemployment, 3 weeks of panic, 3 weeks of thinking I was going to be homeless. You're right, I can't undo what happened, but I can make sure it never happens again." David's voice grew stronger. "Elena, during these past 3 weeks, I learned more about you than I've learned about anyone in years. Your integrity, your compassion, your resilience, the way you stayed by a stranger's bedside day after day, talking to someone you thought couldn't hear you." Tears were streaming down Elena's face now. "I thought you were just some businessman I helped. I never imagined that I was the owner of the company that destroyed your life," David finished gently. "I understand why you're angry. I would be too." Dr. Williams appeared in the doorway. "Is everything all right in here?" Elena wiped her eyes. "I need some air." She rushed past the doctor and out of the room, leaving David calling her name behind her. Margaret found her in the hospital chapel 20 minutes later, sitting in the back pew with her head in her hands. "Honey, what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." Eleanor looked up at the kind nurse who had been so welcoming these past weeks. "Did you know about who he really is?" Margaret sat down beside her. "I suspected something when I saw his insurance information, but it wasn't my place to say anything. Patient confidentiality is sacred. He owns the company that fired me, Margaret. He's been lying there listening to me complain about losing my job, and it's his company. But he didn't fire you, did he? He was unconscious." Eleanor stared at the simple wooden cross at the front of the chapel. "That doesn't make it better. It makes it worse somehow. All those conversations, all those personal things I told him, and he was my boss the entire time. Was he? Or was he just a man whose life you saved, listening to a woman who showed him more kindness than anyone had in years?" Elena looked at Margaret, who was smiling sadly. "That man has been asking about you every 5 minutes since he woke up. Not as an employer, Elena, as someone who cares about you deeply." When Elena returned to room 304 an hour later, David was alone, staring out the window. He turned when she entered, his expression hopeful but cautious. "You came back." "I had to. I need to understand this." Elena sat down in her familiar chair. "How long have you owned Peterson and Associates?" 8 years. I started it right out of business school, built it from nothing. When it grew too large for me to manage alone, I hired Thomas Peterson to run operations so I could focus on my consulting work." "And you had no idea what kind of manager he was?" David looked ashamed. "I trusted him completely, maybe too completely. I let him handle all personnel decisions, all the day-to-day management. I reviewed financial reports, but I never looked at individual employee situations." "So you didn't know he was treating people badly?" "No, I didn't. But that's my fault too. A good owner stays connected to his employees. I was so focused on my other business that I lost touch with what was happening in my own company." Elena studied his face. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because these 3 weeks changed everything for me. Listening to you talk about your dreams, your struggles, your determination to build something meaningful, It reminded me why I started the company in the first place. I wanted to create good jobs for good people. Instead, I hired someone who fired the best person I never knew I had. David reached for a manila folder on his bedside table. I made some phone calls this morning. I'm offering you a position as Director of Marketing, reporting directly to me. The salary is double what you were making before, and I'm including a signing bonus to cover the income you lost these past 3 weeks. Eleanor stared at the folder but didn't take it. David, I can't accept charity. It's not charity. I spent 3 weeks listening to your ideas about marketing, about employee engagement, about building authentic relationships with clients. You have more insight than anyone I've ever worked with. The company needs you. What about Peterson? Thomas Peterson is no longer with the company as of this morning. His severance package was generous, but his employment is terminated immediately. Elena felt a mixture of satisfaction and disbelief. You fired him for firing me. I fired him for running my company in a way that contradicts everything I believe in. Firing you was just the final example of his poor judgment. Elena finally took the folder and opened it. The salary offer made her gasp. This is too much. It's what the position is worth. Elena, I'm not asking you to work for me because I feel guilty, though I do. I'm asking because I want to build something better, and I can't think of anyone I'd rather build it with. 6 months later, Elena sat in her new office on the 20th floor, reviewing marketing proposals for their biggest client. The view of the city was breathtaking, and the work was everything she had dreamed of when she first moved here. David knocked on her open door. Ready for lunch? She looked up and smiled. Somewhere between rebuilding the company culture and working closely together every day, their professional relationship had evolved into something deeper. The man who had listened to her deepest fears and dreams while lying in a hospital bed had become her closest friend, her trusted partner, and eventually, the love of her life. Ready, she said, taking his offered hand. As they walked past the reception desk, Elena noticed a small framed photo David had placed there, a picture of the sidewalk where she had found him, with a small plaque that read, "Sometimes the worst day of your life puts you on the path to the best day of your life." 3 years later, they would exchange vows in that same hospital chapel where Eleanor had cried and prayed for guidance. Margaret was in the front row, beaming as Eleanor walked down the aisle toward the man whose life she had saved and who had, in return, saved hers. The act of kindness that had cost Elena everything had given her more than she ever imagined possible.